In 1478, Spain wasn't some chaotic battlefield of faith. It was a well-oiled machine. Ferdinand and Isabella didn't just want control of their kingdom. They wanted control of souls. That's why they didn't launch the Spanish Inquisition with swords and screaming mobs. They did it with rules, desks, and a terrifying kind of order. Torture wasn't some wild act, it was policy. There were forms to fill out, procedures to follow, approvals to get. And once the machine got rolling, it didn't care who you were. The real problem, though, burning people at the stake was too clean, too fast, too final. You'd tie someone up, light the fire, and within minutes, they were gone. The pain was awful but short. That meant no drawn-out confessions, no time to extract more names, no fear spreading slowly through a town. The Inquisition needed more suffering, more time, more results, so they called in engineers. Actual professionals who didn't think in blood and fire, but in angles, pressure, materials. Their task wasn't to kill, it was to design suffering, to stretch pain across days instead of seconds. Their solution was shockingly simple. Use the victim's own body to destroy itself. No blades, no fire, just weight, pressure, and time. The result was the Judas Cradle. It was a stool, just a stool. But the top wasn't flat. It ended in a hard pyramid, just sharp enough to pierce the skin, but not enough to kill quickly. That was the genius of it. If it had been a spike, the victim might bleed out in hours. But the cradle didn't want you to die. It wanted you to suffer. The pyramid was calculated to be just wrong enough, blunt enough to rip, stretch, and crush without puncturing deep. And that meant a person could survive on it for days. Days. The way it worked was horrifyingly clever. First, the victim was stripped naked. That wasn't just for humiliation. It was to increase sensitivity, make every movement feel worse. Then they were tied up by the wrists, ropes hanging from the ceiling. Slowly, carefully, guards would lower them. Not drop them, lower them, inch by inch. The pyramid's tip would meet the most vulnerable parts of their body. Sometimes the anus, sometimes the vagina, sometimes even the tailbone. The victim's own weight would do the rest. For the first hour or two, many victims could resist. Adrenaline kicked in, muscles tensed. You might be able to hold yourself up, reduce the pressure a little. But that's the thing. Gravity doesn't give up. It doesn't get tired, you do. Slowly, painfully, your strength fades. Your body begins to sag. And as you drop even a centimeter, the pain multiplies. That dull, brutal pyramid doesn't slice. It crushes, grinds, stretches. Every second becomes unbearable. You try to shift your weight, move an inch to find relief, but that just spreads the pain elsewhere. Some people tried to lean to one side, hoping to rest. But the moment they did, the pyramid would cut deeper on that edge. Some tried to tense their legs, hold their weight up, but those muscles always gave out. Eventually, you just hang there. The pyramid holding your body like a hook holds meat, and if that wasn't bad enough, the guards added their own games. They'd tie weights to the victim's ankles, dragging them down just a little faster. Or worse, they'd yank the rope suddenly, then stop it just before the person hit the point. That sudden jolt, the fear of falling hard, it did something to the mind. It didn't just hurt. It broke something inside, but the most terrifying part? This wasn't a wild invention by some lunatic. It was approved, standardized, sent from one town to another with letters saying things like, "This tool gets results." They built them to spec. Same height, same angle, same materials. Because pain was now a system, not chaos. Not madness, just cold, calculated procedure. The real terror of the Judas Cradle wasn't just the pain, it was the patience. See, other torture tools ripped, tore, or crushed in seconds. But this was slow. It didn't need a torturer to do the damage. The cradle just waited. It let gravity and the victim's own body weight do everything. That made it terrifying in a different way. You weren't just being tortured. You were the torture. Your own body was killing itself, one breath at a time. At first, the human body tries to resist. The muscles lock up. Your brain floods your system with adrenaline, cortisol, everything it can to keep you from slipping. Your legs shake. Your arms go numb from holding tension. Every part of you fights to lift yourself off that pyramid point. But you're not built to fight gravity forever. Maybe for an hour, maybe two. But eventually the trembling becomes weakness. Then weakness becomes collapse, and that's when the cradle really starts to work. When the last bit of strength fades, your body gives in. You begin to sag, just a little at first. But that shift, that tiny drop in height, turns discomfort into unbearable agony. The pyramid's tip doesn't cut through. It tears slowly, crushes the tissue. There's no clean wound, no clean anything. Just raw, constant pressure on the most delicate nerves in your body. But the pain is only one part of the torture. The other part? Fear, pure, unrelenting fear. Because the moment you realize what happens if you fall asleep, something changes in your mind. People didn't fear death as much as they feared what came before it. The moment you closed your eyes, even for a second, your body would drop. And when that happened, the pyramid dug deeper. Deeper than before. So they stayed awake, some for 48 hours straight, some longer. Sleep became something they begged to avoid. The guards knew this, and they used it. Sometimes they'd shake the ropes gently, just enough to mimic a fall. Sometimes they'd suddenly tighten or loosen the line to cause a jolt. They didn't need to scream or hit anyone. All they had to do was remind you. Any second, the worst pain of your life could get worse. That was enough. And while all this was happening, something else was building quietly. Infection. You see, the cradle wasn't clean. It wasn't wiped down between uses. There were no gloves, no sterilization. Just blood, sweat, feces, and filth left behind from whoever was tortured before you. So when the skin started breaking, when the tissue around the pyramid began tearing open, the bacteria went in. Fast, deep. Physician records from that time are terrifying to read. These weren't made-up horror stories. These were cold clinical notes written by doctors who watched what the body went through. They described it as a timeline. First 6 hours, shock. Your body floods itself with chemicals to block the pain. You might even feel numb. Some victims said they felt like they were outside their own bodies, watching it all happen. Then came the next phase, between 6 and 24 hours. That's when the body gave up its last bit of strength. The pressure was now full, unrelenting, and the damage began to spread. Not slicing, but crushing. Muscles torn. Blood flow slowed, but not stopped. Nerves screaming, still conscious, still breathing. By the second day, infection took hold. Fever, swelling, wounds filled with pus. And yet they didn't die. Because sepsis, the infection that poisons the blood, takes time. Days. And that's exactly what the Inquisitors wanted. Time. The longer you lived, the longer you could talk. Or scream, or name names. The most chilling part? This entire process, the pain, the breakdown, the infection, was planned, engineered. Not just by cruel men in basements, but by people who truly believed they were doing the right thing. They thought they were saving souls, protecting society, defending faith. And that idea? That people can design pain like a machine and then call it righteous. That's what made the Judas Cradle more than just a tool. It made it a system, a belief, a warning. By the time a victim had spent 2 or 3 days on the Judas Cradle, their body wasn't just in pain. It was dying slowly from the inside. The damage wasn't dramatic, like broken bones or missing limbs. No, it was silent and invisible. The cradle didn't want you to bleed to death. It wanted to keep you right on the edge, where you could still scream, still confess, still give them what they wanted. By now, infection had taken over. The wounds, constantly pressed and stretched by the pyramid, became open doors for every kind of bacteria you could imagine. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was rot. The skin around the point swelled. Fever rose. The victim shook from chills even as sweat soaked their body. Sepsis had begun. Now imagine that while this is happening, you haven't slept in over 48 hours. Your eyes are bloodshot. Your body is shutting down. But the pain won't let you rest. And even if it did, the fear of dropping another inch, of landing harder on that pyramid, is enough to jolt you awake again, over and over. Victims weren't just physically broken. Their minds were unraveling. This is where the real horror began. Sleep deprivation and non-stop pain together form a kind of torture that most people can't imagine. The brain starts short-circuiting. People began to hallucinate, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices that whispered threats or demands. Some victims thought they were being attacked by demons. Others believed they were already in hell. The guards didn't have to ask questions anymore. The prisoners would start talking on their own, saying anything, everything, just to try and make the voices stop. That's how the Inquisition got its confessions. It wasn't just the pain, it was the complete breakdown of reality. Doctors from the time even recorded the stages victims went through. First they begged, pleaded, cried for mercy. Then they began bargaining, offering partial confessions. Maybe they admitted to reading the wrong book, saying the wrong prayer. But by the third stage, they collapsed mentally. Their minds were so fractured, they confessed to things that couldn't possibly be true. That they had flown through the night sky. That they danced with demons. That they murdered people who were still alive and walking the streets, and the inquisitors didn't question it. They wrote it all down, filed it, used it in court, because once someone confessed, no matter how impossible the story, they were guilty. That's exactly what happened to Maria de Zazoya. She was just a midwife, 52 years old, lived in a small town. One neighbor accused her of cursing crops with the evil eye. No proof, no evidence, just suspicion. That was all it took. She was arrested and tortured the very next day, placed on the Judas Cradle, suspended above that pyramid point, left to fight gravity, pain, and fear. After about 30 hours, she started speaking. For 6 hours, she didn't stop. Not because she remembered anything, but because her mind was breaking apart. She confessed to murdering 840 children over 12 years. Said she flew to secret gatherings on a goat given to her by the devil. Said she poisoned babies with venom mixed into milk. She described it all in great detail. And the worst part? The Inquisition believed her, even though the math didn't make sense. Even though the town's death records didn't match. Even though 840 children couldn't just vanish in a small village without everyone noticing. They didn't care. She had confessed. That was enough. Maria's confession was recorded in the official archives, 47 full pages. Page after page of impossible lies. But nobody questioned it. Not yet. Because that's how powerful the Judas Cradle was. It didn't just destroy bodies. It destroyed the truth. Maria's confession was everything the Inquisition wanted, detailed, dramatic, and packed with so-called evidence of witchcraft. 47 pages of horror, all flowing from the mouth of a woman who had been broken in both body and mind. She told them what they wanted to hear. Not because it was true, but because, after enough pain and sleeplessness, truth didn't matter anymore. And still, it wasn't enough to save her. She died 3 weeks later. Infection finally did what the Judas Cradle didn't. Her body gave out. Fever, rotting wounds, sepsis. She died in custody, never officially put on trial. Just another number. Another confession. Another heretic erased. But something unusual happened after her death. A young inquisitor named Alonso de Salazar Frias was assigned to review the witch trials in the Basque region. He came across Maria's file. The details, the math, the claims, none of it made sense to him. He didn't look at her confession with awe like others did. He looked at it with doubt, and that doubt turned into something dangerous. Salazar did what almost no one else dared to do. He investigated, not just the documents, but the facts. He visited the towns mentioned in various confessions. He read church records, birth and death certificates. He interviewed villagers. What he found was shocking. Confessions that claimed people had flown across great distances on the same night they were seen at home, sleeping in bed. People saying they danced in demonic gatherings that supposedly had hundreds of witches, but no one ever saw them leave town. Victims claimed to kill dozens, sometimes hundreds of people, but the actual death records showed nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't just lies, it was fantasy. Made up by minds pushed past the breaking point, Salazar began to see the pattern. None of these confessions made sense. The details didn't match. The timelines were wrong. The geography was impossible. And yet, every single one had been taken as absolute truth just because it came after torture. So he wrote a report, not just a few pages, but a full, methodical takedown of the entire system. He laid out his findings clearly. Torture didn't reveal the truth. It created stories shaped by pain, fear, and confusion. Stories whispered into the ears of broken people who would agree to anything just to make the suffering stop. One line in his report became legendary. There were neither witches nor bewitched until they were talked and written about. In other words, the Inquisition wasn't uncovering evil, it was creating it. His report went to the Supreme Council of Spain in 1612, and what happened next changed history. They believed him, not because they had suddenly grown kind, but because the facts were undeniable. The confessions were falling apart under scrutiny. The entire legal foundation of the Inquisition was crumbling. So, new rules were written. Torture would now be limited. Confessions would require proof. The witch hunt slowed down. The Judas Cradle didn't vanish overnight, but its grip on Europe weakened. Maria's death, senseless, brutal, and unjust, had not been in vain. She didn't live to see her name cleared. She didn't get justice. But her impossible confession was the crack that started the collapse of a brutal system. One woman's suffering exposed the lie at the heart of it all. Because when torture becomes a method, when fear replaces truth, justice dies with it. By the time the 1700s arrived, Europe was changing. Science was rising. Enlightenment thinkers were writing about reason, rights, and justice. The printing press was spreading knowledge faster than ever. Torture was supposed to be fading into the shadows, a thing of the past. But the old ways don't die easily, especially when fear still lives in the hearts of people. And in 1782, that fear claimed one last victim. Her name was Göldi. She lived in the quiet town of Glarus, Switzerland. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She was a maid. She worked for a respected doctor named Johann Jakob Tschudi. And one morning, his young daughter fell suddenly ill, vomiting, twitching, claiming she found needles in her milk. It didn't take long before people whispered the word witch. Tschudi pointed the finger at Anna. No proof, no investigation, just an accusation. And that was enough. Even though it was the 1780s, even though Europe was moving towards science and reason, Anna was arrested and charged with witchcraft. And worse, the court decided to use the old methods one more time. They brought out the Judas Cradle. Think about that. In the same century where people were reading Voltaire and debating human rights, a woman was still being tortured with a pyramid designed in the Middle Ages. According to trial records, Anna was subjected to the cradle for about 18 hours over 2 sessions. The language in the documents is cold, detached, like they were discussing a routine medical procedure. The accused was positioned on the implement according to traditional procedure. It said traditional, as if slowly impaling someone with their own body weight was just another day at the office. By the end of the second session, Anna was barely conscious. She had a fever. Her body was shaking. Her mind, shattered by the pain and fear, did what so many others had done before her. She confessed. She said the devil came to her as a black dog with fiery eyes. Said she had poisoned the girl's milk using needles blessed by demons. Every word was impossible, but no one questioned it. Because the confession had come. And that was all they needed. Anna Göldi was sentenced to death. But this time, something was different. The world noticed. Newspapers in France, Germany, and England published stories about her case. People were horrified. How, they asked, could this still be happening? In an age of enlightenment, legal scholars wrote letters of protest. Activists sent petitions to the Swiss government. Even philosophers who had written about torture in theory now had a real person, an innocent woman, to fight for. The pressure built. Glarus, the town where the trial happened, was flooded with outrage. The court was warned, but they didn't stop. On June 13, 1782, Anna was executed by beheading in the town square, and that's when the backlash exploded. The Swiss Confederation launched a formal investigation. The judges who sentenced her were shamed. The trial was declared a disgrace. But the damage had been done. Anna was gone. Her life taken by a system that had no place in the modern world. Still, her death had power. Austria's Emperor Joseph II took notice. Just 5 years later, in 1787, he issued a new criminal code that banned judicial torture across his empire. France followed in 1789. One by one, the nations of Europe began to change. Anna Göldi was the last person in Europe legally tortured and executed for witchcraft. Her case marked the end of an era, the final page in a dark chapter of human history. But the Judas Cradle, it wasn't destroyed. After Anna Göldi was executed, the backlash was fierce, but something strange happened. The Judas Cradle, the very device that helped destroy her body and mind, wasn't thrown into the fire. It wasn't broken into pieces or buried away like a symbol of shame. It was preserved, not just one either. Dozens of them across Europe. Some were sent to museums. Others ended up in private collections. A few disappeared, likely tucked away in dusty storerooms by people too afraid to destroy what had once been official government property. The most disturbing part? One of the pyramids believed to have been used on Anna herself still exists today. It sits in a quiet backroom of the Swiss National Museum, rarely shown to the public. Curators say it's too graphic, but it's there, real, solid, sharp. You can see others too. In Rothenburg, Germany, there's the Medieval Crime and Justice Museum. It displays torture instruments used by legal courts, not criminals, not mobs, courts. The Judas Cradle sits among them like a relic of law and order. In Vienna, there's another one in the Museum of Torture. And scattered across Europe, collectors own their own versions, some original, some rebuilt from blueprints and descriptions. They call them artifacts. But here's the thing. Some museums treat them as serious history. They tell the truth about pain, cruelty, control, about the way human beings once justified torture in the name of order. They show visitors the raw, uncomfortable side of what justice used to look like. Others turn them into entertainment. There are tourist spots, dark attractions, where you can walk through fake dungeons, pose next to the cradle, buy keychains shaped like tiny pyramids. A torture device, shrunk down into something you can attach to your backpack. That's not education. That's something else. Something darker, and it raises a hard question. How should we remember tools like the Judas Cradle? Do we lock them away, pretending they never existed? Do we display them so people can see what happens when justice loses its soul? Or do we risk turning them into horror-themed attractions, where the pain of thousands becomes just another photo op? That line between memory and spectacle is thin, dangerous, because the cradle wasn't created by madmen. It wasn't the invention of a monster in a castle. It was designed by engineers, approved by judges, built by people who went to church, kissed their children goodnight, and thought they were saving the world. And that's what makes it terrifying. The Judas Cradle is a reminder that systems can go wrong, not because they're run by evil people, but because ordinary people start believing extreme measures are necessary, that a little pain can protect the greater good. That ends justify means. That's how it always starts. The Inquisition didn't call it torture. They called it mercy. A few extra days of suffering instead of being burned alive. A chance to confess. A path to salvation, but mercy twisted by fear becomes cruelty, and cruelty disguised as justice becomes history's most dangerous lie. So when we look at the Judas Cradle today in a glass case, under museum lights, we're not just looking at wood and metal. We're looking at a decision, a choice that was made thousands of times over hundreds of years, to trade truth for obedience, to trade humanity for control. The cradle may be silent now, but its warning still echoes. Over the course of 3 centuries, from the late 1400s until 1782, historians estimate that the Judas Cradle was used on at least 5,000 documented victims across Europe. But that number, it's just the beginning. Many records were lost, destroyed, or never written at all. Small villages didn't always have scribes. Some cases were buried on purpose. So the real number is likely far, far higher. That's thousands of people, men, women, even teenagers, who were stripped, suspended, and slowly destroyed by a device built not to kill, but to unravel. Not by accident, not by some rogue official, but as a sanctioned part of the legal system. All because someone pointed a finger. All because someone whispered heretic or witch. Try to picture it, not the tool, not the pyramid. Picture the person, a mother begging for her children, a healer accused because someone's illness got worse, a farmer dragged in because of a jealous neighbor, a girl who said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Now imagine them hanging in that cold chamber, muscles twitching, rope creaking, pyramid waiting, and no way out but pain, and no way to stop the pain but to speak, and speak they did, but what they said was never trusted, unless it confirmed what the inquisitors already believed. So even the truth was dangerous, confessed too quickly, and they'd say you were mocking the process. Wait too long, and they'd say you were resisting the faith. Give a name, and someone else got dragged in. Stay silent, and the torture continued. It was a trap, one with no exit, no justice, no mercy, and all of it was dressed up as righteousness. That's the part most people don't understand. The cradle wasn't used by madmen frothing at the mouth. It was used by men in robes and uniforms. It was written about in rulebooks. It had diagrams, measurements, guidelines. Pain became paperwork. It became normal, and that normalization is what made it so dangerous. When torture becomes a tool of routine, a line has already been crossed, and it's very, very hard to go back. Especially when people convince themselves it's for the greater good. That's how history repeats. Because the lesson of the Judas Cradle isn't just about medieval cruelty. It's about what happens when fear overrules compassion, when belief outweighs facts, when power demands obedience at any cost. That's why it matters today. When we talk about torture in modern times, when we hear phrases like enhanced, interrogation, when governments defend harsh methods, in the name of national security, we should remember the cradle. Because back then, they also believed they were doing the right thing. And look where it led. The victims of the Judas Cradle didn't get justice. Most were buried quietly. Some weren't buried at all. Their names lost, their pain undocumented. But their suffering gave the world something, a warning, a line that should never be crossed again. And even now, centuries later, standing in front of one of those pyramids in a museum, you can still feel it. That cold silence, that sharp point, that question hanging in the air. What would I have confessed to just to make it stop? So now you know, the Judas Cradle wasn't a myth or a symbol. It was real, built by real hands, used by real institutions, and its victims were real people. People who laughed, prayed, worked, loved. People whose only crime in most cases was being vulnerable at the wrong moment. But even after all this, there's one detail that sticks harder than anything else. The Judas Cradle wasn't created by monsters. It was created by officials, by educated men in palaces, not dungeons, by people who truly believed they were doing the right thing, by engineers who were simply solving a problem, how to make pain last longer without killing, by priests who thought they were saving souls, by bureaucrats following procedures. And that's what makes it so haunting, because evil, when it wears a mask of order, is harder to recognize, harder to stop. The cradle shows us that torture doesn't need rage. It just needs a reason, a justification, a goal that seems noble on paper, like protecting faith, defending the nation, rooting out threats. That's all it takes. And when those justifications pile up one after another, you don't end up with safety. You end up with a pyramid. What happened in Europe across those 3 centuries didn't just damage bodies. It shattered truth itself. It created false confessions, fake crimes, entire histories built on pain and fear. And the worst part? Most of it was done legally, quietly, with approval. But in the end, that silence was broken by people like Maria de Zazoya, whose impossible confession made the system collapse under its own weight. By inquisitors like Salazar, who dared to question the rules he was taught to enforce. By Göldi, whose execution in a so-called Age of Reason sparked an international outcry. Their suffering forced change. That's why, In 1949, centuries later, the Geneva Conventions were written. They explicitly banned torture under international law. They drew a line, a promise, that no matter how scared we are, no matter how desperate, we don't go back, we don't rebuild the pyramid. And yet today, in some parts of the world, that line is blurred. Again, torture is renamed, hidden, justified, and people turn away from it just like they did before. Because it's easier to believe the lie than to confront what it costs to protect the truth. So here's the question. Should we keep these torture devices in museums? Should the Judas Cradle be on display? It's a hard one. On one hand, yes, people need to see it. To understand it wasn't a storybook monster, but a real, cold, sharp object used on real people. Seeing the ropes, the pyramid, the stool, it forces you to face history's darkest truths. But on the other hand, when museums start selling miniature versions as souvenirs, when torture becomes part of a haunted tour or a novelty keychain, something gets lost. Something sacred. The pain behind those tools isn't entertainment. It's a warning. So maybe the answer isn't just how we display the cradle. Maybe it's how we talk about it. We tell the full story. Not just about pain, but about justice. But what happens when justice turns into cruelty and cruelty turns into policy? We remember the names Maria, Anna, the thousands who didn't even get a grave, and we carry their memory as a shield because history doesn't repeat itself because people forget. It repeats when they stop caring. So, whatever you believe about power, about justice, about punishment, just remember this. The Judas Cradle was once called mercy, and mercy, when twisted by fear, becomes something else entirely.